If you'd like to turn to Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10. We're going to be reading from there in just a moment. Matthew chapter 10. It seems like this world is becoming more rabidly antagonistic toward righteousness. So what do? Do we gather for yelling practice so we can increase the volume of our yells? Or do we, like a bear, find a place to hibernate? Do we hide? Or do we hit? What's our response? Well, in Matthew chapter 10, the disciples of Jesus are going to face something similar to that. In verse 16, he says, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves." Before we get to the lesson proper, I want to walk you through the text and what's taking place here and why this statement means something, and hopefully we can see why it means something to us. It is an awkward statement, I acknowledge, but I think if we can dissect it and put it back together, we'll see the value in it. First of all, this is the first occasion that Jesus is going to send his disciples into Galilee. And it's the first occasion following his resurrection that he is sending his disciples out. So both of those make this a very momentous occasion in the life of Jesus and in the life of his disciples. Second of all, he's sending his disciples out into an adverse society or adverse environment. If you read further, beginning of verse 17, "But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues. You'll be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you will speak, for it will be given to you in that hour what you should speak. For it is not you to speak, but the Spirit of the Father who speaks in you. Now brother will deliver up brother to death, and the father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death. And you'll be hated by all for my name's sake. But he who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in the city, flee to another. For surely I say to you, you'll not have gone through the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master." So the first adverse thing they're going to face is they're going to face civil authorities that may be less than judicious in their execution of justice with them. That's one level. But the next level becomes even more poignant for them. And now then it's going to simply be brother will deliver up to brother. So now it's no longer those that we trust with civil justice to be able to equitably administrate justice. Now it's going to be those who are the closest to us that will be the ones that will be betraying us. And so you have that level. The disciples are going to face that kind of adversity. But go back before verse 16. He says, "Assuredly I tell you, it shall be more tolerable in the land of Sodom and Gomorrah this day, in the day of judgment, than for that city. Behold, I send you out as sheep amidst the wolves." Here they're going to go out, and among some, they're going to find a receptive audience. Among others, they're not going to find a receptive audience. And also, they need to be able to discern when it's time to shake the dust off their feet and go on down the road. They're going to take nothing with them. Everything's going to be provided. Jesus is sending them out at great risk. He said, you're going to be a sheep among wolves, and then you're going to face this other side of it. And it's going to get more personal for you. He is sending them out at great risk, but he is sending them out anyway. Many a commander has sent his troops out inadequately and improperly tooled. But Jesus is warning them here. He's preparing them here. He's not pulling a punch with them. He's being upfront. He's being honest. He's trying to prepare them for what they're going to face and how they're going to be treated. You're going to take this gospel to every city. You're going to preach the kingdom is at hand. This is a kingdom message for you. The message is powerful. And the disciples are going to go because they love him. They are convinced of who he is. They're passionate about who he is. And they're going to go and they're going to be his disciples to spread the word, to spread this kingdom message. But in the midst of that, he says, I want you to beware. I want you to beware of some things. I want you to beware of some men. I want you to beware when you go into the house. I want you to beware of how you're treated. And then he says, I send you out as sheep among wolves, therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. In the environment that you face, in the environment you're taking this kingdom message, you be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. First of all, he says he's going to send them out among wolves. And he says they're going to be treacherous. Wolves will rip and rend and tear their victim. And it sounds like a very helpless picture because you are sheep among wolves. And wolves love to prey on sheep. And so now it seems like as a lamb, you're going to be unprotected from the predator that's there. How are you going to be able to survive? He says, you may be tempted to turn and be as vicious as they are. But that's not how you need to respond. It may be that you're called upon, yet you think you can contemplate something in kind, not just being vicious, but the way that you treat people. And as a result of that, you don't turn and you don't then become what they are. Rather, he says, this is what you do. You be wise. That word wise is not the word that we normally think of the word wise, which is the word sophos, which is the word we've been talking about in past Sundays. This is a different word for wise. And this word for wise means you rein it in or you curb it. And what he's telling them is when they go into this environment, you may be tempted to act like they do. You may be tempted to do what they do. You may be tempted to treat people like they treat people. But no, you curb it. You don't have unrestrained assault verbally with them. You curb it. You rein in what your natural response may be. It may be as they treat you this way that you naturally would respond away. He says, no, you do not have unflattering speech. You curb it. You rein it in. And that's very important for them to see. Because as they're going to be treated, as the text tells us that he's warning them about, they certainly might be tempted to not rein it in. And then he does something that is really unique with regard to what he's telling them here. He's saying, I want you to understand, this is not just about animals. This is a spiritual battle. I'm using metaphors here, he's saying. But this is a spiritual battle. And the battle is real. And the enemy is real. And so what I want to do is I want to counsel you with something. In this spiritual battle, I want you first of all to be wise as serpent and harmless as a dove. Wow. Wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. Serpents, doves. Could you have two more unsuspecting animals that he could contrast? I'm reminded of the book of Isaiah when he talks about when the kingdom comes and the kind of people, the kind of character they're going to have. You're going to have a lion and a lamb lying down together. And the mother will lay her baby at the opening of the viper's hole, the viper's nest. And here now he uses serpents and doves. And at first that might just arrest our attention, and I think naturally so. Because that's not what we expect. If he's telling them you need to be wise when you go out, I don't think what we'd normally say is you need to be wise like serpents. We might use someone or something else to say wise about. Serpents don't normally have a good reputation. They're cunning, they're smart, and they're cautious. And they're shrewd. They know when to strike. They know who to strike. They know how to strike. Now, I must tell you, the next statement I'm going to give is not by personal experience. Because when I have seen a snake, I haven't stayed around long enough to see if he indeed does this. But I'm told by what I read that snakes really don't want to fight. They want to escape, and they'll escape as fast as they can. Like I said, I've not stood around long enough to see if that's true or not. I'll take someone's word, but I'm still going to run. He says, you be wise as serpents. In Colossians chapter 4 and verse 5, it's a companion passage to Ephesians chapter 5 we've been looking at. But I like what the message, Eugene Peterson says in the message. As you live out there among folks, don't miss a trick, make use of every opportunity. And that's what he's telling them here. You need to be wise as a serpent. Here the serpent is cunning. Here the serpent is cautious. Here the serpent is smart. And here the serpent knows when and where and how to strike. He's telling his disciples, you need to be wise as serpents. What you see is this is an exception to the use of what we normally think of as serpent in the Bible. There are a couple of other occasions that serpents have a favorable point of view. You remember when Moses threw down his rod? It became a serpent, and he picked it back up and it became a rod. I'm thinking he's awfully brave. And then you remember when the people were being bitten and by poisonous snakes, and they put a pole in the center, and that pole had a snake around it and became the husband and idol, and they looked upon it and they were healed. Those two occasions. And now this one, you have snakes referred to positively, but most of the time, when we think of snakes, we think of them negatively. And most of the time, we don't think of the garden variety snake. We think of a rattlesnake. We think of a cobra. Or on it goes. We think of the snake that is poisonous or the snake that will harm. But there are some who know to be shrewd, who know to be cunning, who know to be cautious. And he's saying, you be wise that way. Not deceptive. He's not saying you're shrewd that you be deceptive. He's not saying you're cunning that you be unflattering in that. In fact, he puts doves and serpents together. Why? Because if you just are the one, you can tend to be vicious. If you're the other, you may be eaten. And so he says what we need is we need a balanced set here. And so you be wise as serpents. But then he says harmless as doves. A dove looks at unmixed or pure. A dove looks at innocence. And notice he says harmless as a dove. Two passages where that word harmless is found. In the book of Philippians. In the book of Philippians chapter 2. In the book of Philippians chapter 2. Look at verse 14 and 15. Do all things without complaining and disputing, that you may become blameless and harmless. There's our word. Children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked, perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Second passage is found in the book of Romans. Romans chapter 16. In Romans chapter 16 and verse 19, the word harmless is not used, but the word for harmless is there. Romans chapter 16 verse 19, for your obedience has become known to all. Therefore I'm glad on your behalf, but I want you to be wise in what is good and simple concerning evil. That word simple is harmless. So look at what Paul says. I want you to be wise in what is good. Wise as serpents. Simple concerning evil. Harmless. I don't want you to be naive concerning the shame of of sin. I want you to be aware. I want you to be aware of this serpent, what the serpent will do to you. But in doing so, you be harmless. You be simple concerning evil. Don't be naive concerning evil. You be simple. You be harmless in doing so. Now, when we can put those two together, when we can put the wise serpent and the harmless dove, then we have someone that offers a balanced picture. Maybe we don't like the figure serpent, and maybe we don't identify with the word dove, with the animal dove. But look at wise and harmless, or simple. Wise and simple or harmless. You be wise, but harmless. Let's look at a couple of examples, I think, that maybe can help us put some meat on the bones of that. Just a story in 1 Samuel chapter 25. is a story about Abigail and David and Nabal. You remember David is traveling through the country, and he and his band of men, mighty men, are hungry. And they come to the area where Nabal is at, and they ask Nabal for a share in part of their food. Can we sit at your table and have part of your food? And Nabal says, you got to be kidding me. Get out of here. I don't want anything to do with you. And so what he does is he insults them. Well, as a result of that, David's not taking that line down. Nabal is fixing to be a dead man prematurely here because David's fixing to go after him. But someone runs and tells Abigail. And Abigail fixes this big, extravagant meal. And she takes it to David and says, here, my Lord, please accept this. Because my husband's name is Nabal, he's a fool. He's foolish. And even those who worked for him said he was a fool. Well, Abigail goes home, and the next morning she tells Nabal what happens, and he either has a heart attack or a stroke, but nonetheless, he dies within a short period of time. What did Abigail do? Abigail was wise. Wise how? She avoided a disaster. She was cautious. She was smart. She was swift. And what did she do? She prepared a meal that spared a war. But she was harmless as a dove. How was she harmless as a dove? Because she went to David and said, please, my Lord, accept this meal for you so that you will recognize my husband is a fool. I know it, but please, you accept this. She was wise in what she prepared and how she prepared it and presented it, and she was harmless in her appeal to him to avoid a war. She was wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. A second illustration is found in the book of Esther with Mordecai and Esther. You recall that Ahasuerus has been infatuated with Esther, cutting the story short. And so Esther finds herself in the court now in the palace of Ahasuerus. But Ahasuerus' right-hand man is Haman. And Haman has duped Ahasuerus into making this decree that all the Jews are going to be annihilated. But there's one old crusty, grisly Jew out there that will not bow to Haman. And it's Uncle Mordecai. Uncle Mordecai at the gate when Haman comes by, prancing along, as everybody else bows down, he refuses to bow. And Haman is enraged about that. And so he goes about building a gallows to hang Mordecai on. But Mordecai knows what the decree is. And he says to Esther, sweetheart, you got to go talk to the king for us. She said, whoa, I can't do that. No, not. He hadn't called for me, doesn't call for me, can't go. If I go, he doesn't call, I'm going to lose it, you're going to lose it. He said, look, who knows what for this time you've been put here? You got to take the risk. You go talk to the king. And so after several times of having a meal and inviting Haman in, Haman is puffed up. He thinks the king is really honoring him. And finally they lower the boom on him. And the plot is revealed of what Haman has duped Ahasuerus to do to the Jews. And he hangs on his own gallows. Mordecai was wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. How was he wise as a serpent? Because he was wise in knowing the plan of Haman and knowing how Esther could save the nation. He was harmless in that he did not strike out in kind against Haman, but simply helped Esther reveal the plan to the king. He didn't respond back in kind. He didn't respond back viciously or repetitiously. He responded back to the king harmlessly through Esther. You see, he was wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. And we could tell that story many times over through the life of Christ. How that he was wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. But let's move to something else. Let's bring that home for us for just a little while. How does this have application to us? What does it do for us? Well, I was thinking about that and I thought, You know, in preaching, you have to be wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. You have to know when to say, what to say, and how to say it, so it does not come across in an inappropriate or unflattering way. You need to be wise about that, but in the same time, be harmless as a dove in your motive and purpose. I thought about that with regard to elders. How at times elders are called upon to form judgments about things. Certain issues or people are brought before them, and there's a dispute, there's something that is there, and how elders have to be wise as a serpent, but yet harmless as a dove. I thought about parents. I thought about parents of young ones. I thought about parents of teenagers. And then how about parents of grown children? Wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. Know when to strike, how to strike. Swift to strike, but yet harmless as a dove. Know when to say, what to say, how to say, yet harmless as a dove. Innocent and pure, soft, quiet, and peaceful. Is that challenging, parents? Is that challenging in times where there is a confrontation? Is that challenging in times in which your child or children have questions? And you want to answer the question, but in the wisest and most harmless way? And then I was thinking about children. And I was thinking about those who are advancing up the years. There's the call for every stage as a child relating to parents to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. Just because we become adult children doesn't mean that is any less. Because with a parent, sometimes the issue becomes that you need to be the wise one, but you need to be harmless as a dove when you do that. And then sometimes children, when confrontation with parents are there, to learn to early to be wise as a serpent, but to be harmless as a dove. And then I was thinking about our relationship together as brethren. How many times would issues or controversies or disagreements or personality strives be solved if we were just wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove? If we didn't treat each other like we were a block of wood to be chopped up, but like a surgeon with a scalpel, very carefully cutting past tissue, sinew, nerves, and muscle to get to the problem. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, and verse 24 and 25 and 26, I think of this passage not only in the context of what I just related to us as brethren, I think of this passage in the context of teaching others. Notice what he says. A servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle, able to teach, patient, in humility, correcting those who are in opposition, if God perhaps will grant them repentance so that they may know the truth, that they may come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil, having been taken captive by him to do his will. What's Paul telling Timothy there? You be wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. You be wise, but you be gentle. You be peaceful. You have humility. Those that oppose themselves, you stand up to them, but you do so in such a way to call them back. So that why? So they escape the snare. Oh, the snare of the devil. Here the devil is used in a different way. Escape the snare of the devil. In teaching people the Bible and teaching people about salvation, you have to be wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. You take that truth and you wisely, you cautiously, you smartly, you swiftly use that truth, but you do it gently You do it peacefully. You do it quietly. People will be won by that. How many have been turned off because what we did was we tried to kill a fly with a sledgehammer in the first study? Or in trying to correct someone, we treat them like a chopping block and chop them to pieces. How many times would our relationships and those we teach be enhanced if we would just be harmless as a dove? Or wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. It would just be wise and harmless. Wise and harmless in our relationships. Wise and harmless in our relationship with God. You think about that. To be wise enough and discerning enough to know when to curb it. The natural response. And then harmless to be able to know when to bow before Him. You see, this passage really has a practical application throughout our lives. In fact, I would aver that if we want to live successful lives, it will not be because we were just simply wise as a serpent or harmless as a dove. It'll be because we have the matching set. In fact, it's that matching set that completes the picture. Think of it this way. If you're thinking about sharpening a knife and you have the steel and you have the blade on the knife, how do you sharpen the knife? On that steel, you cut one edge against the other. One edge against the other. Wouldn't we think that if we're cutting one edge against the other, that it would dull the knife? No, cutting one edge against the other sharpens the knife. Well, what we have here is we have two things cutting against each other that make a complete set. They form our character, to sharpen our character. And so we are wise and we are harmless at the same time. From Eden, the serpent has been cursed. The serpent is swift. The serpent is smart. The serpent is cunning. And there is kind of an enchantment that comes with his intoxication. But there's no hiding his purpose and no hiding his method. And he destroys those whom he would charm. But the dove is peaceful, the dove is quiet, the dove is restful. But the dove is also vulnerable. And so while being harmless, the dove needs to know why, needs to be wise. So here's what I think he's saying and what I think he's saying to us. We need to be as wise as men in the world, but not inferior. Yea, even wiser than people in the world. So if we'll be wise and harmless, we will beware. And we will survive. Wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. I'm so glad you're here this morning. And perhaps there's someone here this morning that has a need that we can help. Perhaps there's someone here this morning that's been contemplating their salvation before God, and they've been exercising wisdom about that. And maybe need to harmlessly come and bow before the Lord and confessing to be the Christ, to be baptized for the remission of sins. Or maybe if you're joining us virtually, you just need to go in your closet to pray. But we must be wise and harmless at the same time. If we can help you, come while we stand and while we sing.